The meeting room is warm, airless, and politely attentive. A manager stands at the front, speaking in confident tones about a plan that feels recycled, slightly hollow. Around the table, heads nod in rhythm. Pens move. Faces arrange themselves into careful agreement. And then there is one man who doesn't nod. He isn't scowling. He isn't whispering objections. He simply listens without performing belief. His face stays neutral, almost calm. He writes nothing down because there is nothing new to record. When asked if the direction makes sense, he answers plainly, without enthusiasm. It is a small refusal. So small it barely registers. Yet the temperature in the room shifts. He does not argue with the manager. He does not roll his eyes or make sarcastic remarks under his breath. When others laugh at predictable jokes, he offers a faint smile at most. When praise is distributed upward, he remains silent. There is no rebellion in him, at least not the kind people recognize. That is what makes it harder to confront. A rebel can be corrected, warned, or removed. A disruptive employee gives the system something concrete to point at. But this man gives nothing. He completes his work. He meets deadlines. He simply refuses the small rituals of submission that make hierarchy feel comfortable. And without those rituals, something unspoken begins to tremble beneath the surface. Nothing official happens. No emails from HR. No formal warnings. On paper, everything remains normal. But the air changes in ways that are difficult to document. Eye contact becomes shorter. Conversations pause when he approaches. Meetings are scheduled without looping him in, then summarized later with polite efficiency. When he offers an idea, it is acknowledged but not explored. The same idea, voiced by someone else a week later, is suddenly promising. No one accuses him of anything. Instead, tone becomes careful, slightly distant. He can feel it, though no one would admit it exists. If he has broken no rule, he wonders quietly, why does the room now treat him like a problem? Hierarchy runs on signals. Small ones. A nod at the right moment. A laugh that arrives on cue. A tone that says, I accept your position above mine. Most of the time, these signals are automatic. People offer them without thinking because it keeps the structure smooth. When someone withholds them, even politely, the structure feels strained. His calm starts to look like distance. His silence begins to feel like evaluation. Others project judgment onto him, even if he has spoken none. It is easier to forgive anger than detachment. Anger still participates in the game. Detachment suggests the game itself is optional. And that raises a quiet, unsettling question: what happens when a man cannot be steered? If you step back far enough, the meeting room stops being a single room. It becomes part of a pattern that started much earlier. In school, you learned to raise your hand before speaking. You learned that timing mattered as much as accuracy. The correct answer delivered with the wrong tone could still cost you approval. Later, performance reviews replaced report cards. The language changed, but the structure remained. Alignment. Cultural fit. Areas of growth. None of these phrases measure raw competence alone. They measure how smoothly you adapt to the expectations of those above you. Human resources departments are not designed primarily to reward brilliance. They are designed to reduce friction. Predictability keeps systems stable. Adjustable people keep managers comfortable. This does not make management evil. It makes it dependent on something subtle, emotional flexibility. The ability to respond correctly to status cues. The ability to soften edges when necessary. And when someone cannot or will not be softened, the problem may not be authority itself, but the loss of control over how he feels and responds. Watch closely who rises fastest. It is not always the sharpest mind in the room. It is often the person who reads the room best. The one who senses when to agree, when to soften a critique, when to echo a superior's phrasing back to them with subtle reinforcement. The ideal employee is rarely defined by output alone. He is agreeable without appearing weak. Confident without threatening anyone's position. He knows how to signal loyalty in small, consistent ways. He understands that perception is a form of currency. Promotions tend to follow those signals. Not because competence is irrelevant, but because competence without manageability introduces risk. A highly capable person who does not respond predictably to praise or pressure is difficult to steer. And steering is expensive when it fails. If incentives do not move you, neither reward nor mild fear can guide your behavior. In a system built on leverage, the man who cannot be leveraged becomes complicated. Sometimes even dangerous. This is where he becomes unusual. Praise lands on him, but it does not change his posture. A compliment from a superior earns a simple thank you, nothing more. There is no visible surge of loyalty, no extra eagerness to please. When mild criticism appears, he considers it, adjusts if it makes sense, and moves on. He does not spiral. He does not scramble to repair status. His work remains steady. Deadlines are met. Standards are upheld. Yet he refuses to emotionally invest in the small competitions and alliances that orbit power. He does not chase proximity to decision-makers. He does not signal hunger for advancement. So the system searches for a label. Reserved. Hard to read. Eventually, difficult. Not because he disrupts outcomes, but because he disrupts expectations. If approval does not motivate him, and subtle disapproval does not intimidate him, then what exactly guides him? And how do you manage a man who seems guided by something internal? At first, nothing about his output changes. Projects are completed on time. Mistakes are rare. Clients are satisfied. If you were to measure his value in clear numbers, the numbers would hold steady. But the language around him begins to shift. In a quarterly review, the feedback sounds polished and almost supportive. Strong individual contributor. Then a pause. Could work on collaboration. No specific example follows. Another phrase appears. Needs better alignment with team culture. Again, no clear incident, just a tone that suggests something slightly off. He leaves the room replaying the conversation, searching for a concrete failure. There isn't one. What exists instead is a narrative forming around him. He is no longer simply competent. He is competent with an asterisk. Colleagues begin using softer words that carry sharper edges. Independent becomes detached. Direct becomes rigid. The shift is subtle enough to deny, yet consistent enough to feel deliberate. He starts to wonder whether anyone can explain the problem in plain terms. Is this punishment conscious, planned in quiet meetings? Or is it automatic, a reflex that activates when someone refuses to bend? The changes do not arrive all at once. They arrive in small omissions. A project he would normally be perfect for is assigned elsewhere. A meeting invite appears in someone else's calendar but not his. When he asks for context, the answer is polite and vague. "We thought you were busy." It was last minute. Conversations begin to cluster in corners. He walks into the break room and notices a pause that lasts half a second too long. It is subtle enough to ignore, but impossible not to register. Information reaches him later than it used to, trimmed down and predigested. He notices everything. And he reacts to nothing. No visible frustration. No attempt to force inclusion. He continues producing at the same level, answering questions when asked, offering input when appropriate. His calm becomes another variable the system cannot quite measure. The unspoken test continues. Will exclusion push him to adjust? Will he soften, signal more enthusiasm, chase connection? He does not. The atmosphere tightens, not with conflict, but with distance. And slowly, he begins to fade from the center without ever failing. For a long time, he believes something simple: do the work well, and the rest will follow. It is a clean idea. Comforting. Merit rises. Effort compounds. Results speak for themselves. That belief carries many men through their early careers. But now the pattern feels less straightforward. He watches others advance who produce less, yet move with greater ease inside the structure. They mirror the language of leadership. They anticipate preferences before they are spoken. They align quickly, sometimes instinctively, with the emotional tone of those above them. Output still matters. But it is not the only currency in circulation. Adaptability to hierarchy becomes its own skill, one that often outweighs raw competence. The ability to reassure superiors that their authority is intact can matter more than independent accuracy. He does not feel anger as much as clarity. The system is not broken. It is operating exactly as designed. And once that realization settles, a quieter question begins to form: if competence alone does not determine your trajectory, then what, precisely, is being rewarded? There is something unsettling about a man who does not need constant approval. Not because he says so, but because he behaves as if it is true. He does his work, speaks when necessary, and leaves the room without scanning faces for reaction. He does not orbit power. He does not chase reassurance. For others, this can feel like exposure. Most people have made small compromises to survive inside hierarchy. They laugh when they would rather stay silent. They soften opinions to maintain smoothness. They tell themselves it is practical, even wise. Then someone appears who seems unwilling to trade inner alignment for comfort. He does not criticize them. He does not announce his standards. Yet his restraint highlights their adjustments. His calm suggests another option exists. And that is where tension forms. Not from hostility, but from reflection. Sometimes punishment is not a response to what you do. It is a response to what your presence reveals. He does not introduce himself with his title. He rarely reminds anyone of his experience. Yet when he speaks, the room adjusts almost imperceptibly. Conversations slow. People lean in. Not because he demands attention, but because his words tend to be measured, considered, and difficult to dismiss. This kind of influence is subtle. It does not depend on official authority. It grows from consistency, from a reputation for clarity. Over time, others begin to seek his opinion privately, even if they avoid aligning with him publicly. That is where discomfort emerges. Hierarchy prefers power to move in predictable directions, flowing downward from position. When respect forms independently of rank, it disrupts that flow. Influence without submission creates an invisible shift in the room. It suggests that authority can exist outside formal structures. And when people start listening to someone who does not visibly defer, the structure feels something slipping beyond its control. Control is efficient. It runs on clear signals and predictable responses. A directive is given, and behavior adjusts. Rewards reinforce compliance. Mild consequences correct deviation. From a distance, it looks orderly, almost elegant. Respect works differently. It cannot be assigned through an org chart or granted in a memo. It forms slowly, often without announcement. It gathers around consistency, competence, and integrity. You cannot demand it without weakening it. Systems favor control because it is measurable. Compliance can be tracked. Alignment can be reported. Respect is harder to quantify. It does not guarantee obedience. In fact, it sometimes produces the opposite, thoughtful disagreement delivered without fear. An independent man often operates on respect rather than control. He responds to reason, not pressure. He cooperates when convinced, not when cornered. This makes him reliable in one sense and unpredictable in another. And unpredictability, even when grounded in principle, makes structured environments uneasy. The meeting is scheduled 2 weeks in advance. The calendar invite is neutral, almost polite. When he sits down, the tone is measured, professional, carefully constructed. There is appreciation for his output. Strong results. Reliable execution. The words are arranged neatly before the shift arrives. Then come the softer phrases. We'd like to see more visible engagement. There have been concerns about cultural alignment. No one names a specific incident. No one points to a failed project. The issue is atmospheric, not operational. He listens without interrupting. He asks for clarification and receives more abstractions. Team energy. Collaborative presence. The language floats just above anything concrete enough to challenge. It is not a firing. Not a warning. It is a signal. Adjust or accept the trajectory that follows. And for the first time, the choice feels less theoretical and more immediate. After the meeting, he sits alone longer than usual. The office hum continues outside his door, keyboards tapping, phones ringing, laughter drifting down the hall. Everything sounds normal. Inside, something is being weighed. He knows what adjustment would look like. A little more visible enthusiasm. A few carefully timed compliments. More participation in conversations that orbit status rather than substance. None of it would require dishonesty, exactly. Just emphasis in the right places. Part of him considers it. The path is clear. Promotions often follow those who smooth their edges. But the resistance he feels is not pride. It is quieter than that. It is the sense that once you begin performing belief you do not hold, it becomes easier the second time. And easier again after that. The real question is not whether he can bend. It is how much of himself would remain if he does. The end does not arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It unfolds through process. A restructuring announcement. A new reporting line. A role that slowly narrows until it no longer resembles what he was hired to do. He understands the direction without anyone stating it directly. In some cases, he chooses first. A short resignation letter, measured and professional. In others, the decision is made for him, framed as strategic realignment. Either way, the separation is tidy. Access revoked. Farewell messages exchanged. The system absorbs the change without visible disruption. Within weeks, the rhythm returns to normal. Meetings proceed smoothly. Nods resume in familiar patterns. From the outside, stability has been restored. And yet, something lingers beneath the surface. Not regret exactly, but a quiet awareness. A capable man was not removed for incompetence, but for incompatibility. The structure remains intact. The question it exposed does not. It would be easy to turn the story into something personal. To imagine a villain, a jealous manager, a quiet campaign against him. But most of the time, it is less dramatic than that. The system did not hate him. It reacted to him. Organizations are built to preserve stability. They rely on predictability, on patterns that can be managed and adjusted. When someone operates from an internal compass that does not respond reliably to external pressure, it introduces uncertainty. Not chaos, but volatility. Volatility makes planning difficult. It complicates control. So the response is rarely emotional. It is structural. The environment shifts to protect its balance. And in doing so, it quietly removes what it cannot easily steer. There is a cost to remaining unmanageable. It often appears in slow promotions, in missed invitations, in the subtle distance that forms between you and those who climb more easily. Security can feel thinner when you refuse to play by unspoken rules. The path upward becomes less predictable. Isolation can follow. Not dramatic exile, but a quiet sense of standing slightly apart. You are included, yet not fully absorbed. Trusted for competence, but not embraced for conformity. And still, something else grows in that space. A steadier kind of self-respect. The knowledge that your reactions are chosen, not triggered. That your agreement, when given, is real. Friction remains. But so does clarity about who you are. He is not alone anymore. Across industries, in offices, workshops, and remote calls, more men are pulling back from the performance. They still work. They still deliver. But the automatic nod is fading. The reflexive enthusiasm feels heavier than it once did. It is not a loud rebellion. There are no speeches, no manifestos. Just a quiet recalibration. A growing unwillingness to trade inner alignment for smoother optics. Some call it disengagement. Others call it maturity. Whatever the name, the pattern is spreading. And if enough people begin responding from an internal compass rather than external pressure, something fundamental shifts. The question is not whether systems will resist. It is what happens when resistance becomes common.